Have you ever had the feeling that someone only approached you out of interest? Have you ever trusted someone so much that you preferred to keep a secret, believing that love was enough? In today's video, you will get to know the story of Magdalena, a mother who gave up everything for her son until the day he showed up with his wife and a notary. This is not just a story about inheritance and betrayal. It's about discernment, about the moment when a woman realizes that silence can protect, but can also destroy. If you have ever suspected the intentions of someone close, or felt that you were being used by the person you love the most, this story will touch you deeply. Stay with me until the end, because understanding what Magdalena did in the face of mistrust can help you see people around you more clearly, and who knows, keep you from giving your trust to someone who doesn't deserve it. I was never one to talk much about my life, but there are things we need to let out before they end up swallowing us inside. My name is Magdalena. I'm 64 years old, a retired literature teacher, and, until recently, I thought I had already gone through all the big twists of life. I was married for more than 30 years to Armando, a man of few words but of great character. After he died, I inherited a hacienda in the countryside, an old productive property that I kept secret. It was his request. He said I should entrust that asset only to someone who proved deserving of it. And for years, I kept it to myself, as if it were a secret between the two of us. Even after his death, I live in a simple house, with my plants, my books, and my quiet routines. My son, Julian, is the most precious thing I have. I cared for him since he was little, with all the dedication of a mother who lost her mother-in-law, and had to become everything. Mother, father, advisor, nurse, cook, everything. I always thought that, deep down, he had a good heart, even with some attitudes that left me in doubt. Only when he decided to marry Camilla did something inside me freeze. I can't explain it. She was too friendly, one of those who arrive wanting to solve everything, meddle in everything, and always with a very ready smile. There was one time, shortly before the wedding, when she asked me how I supported myself. She said she found it curious that a retiree lived so well. I laughed on the outside, but inside that bothered me. The ceremony was beautiful, simple, the way he wanted. I saw in his eyes the excitement of someone who thinks he is going to restart life. I was happy, of course, even with that tightness in my chest. After the wedding, she started coming here often, always offering help to organize my things, wanting to know where I kept old documents, asking about my story with Armando. I thought it was just curiosity. I've always been reserved. I've never been one to open my life to just anyone, even a daughter-in-law. She seemed in a hurry, and one day, without even warning, she appeared here with a man, a notary, as she herself introduced him. She said they were there to start the paperwork for the transfer of the farm. What farm? I thought. That hit me so hard I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. She spoke naturally, as if she were settling something agreed upon, and she said, "Julian told me about the property. Now that we're married, we think it's better to centralize everything with him." Those words kept spinning in my head. I never told anyone. Anything. Never. So where did she get that from? I looked at her, then at the man beside her, who was already pulling some papers from his briefcase as if it were something normal. I felt a chill down my spine. Only then did I realize. She knew. And if she knew, either Julian told her, or she found out by herself. But how? What does she want? What does he want? And the most desperate thing of all was realizing that, until that moment, I still didn't know if my son was involved in this, or if he was also being used. I couldn't react at the time. I just stood there, feeling my heart beat so hard it seemed they could hear it outside. Camilla started walking around the living room as if she owned the house, talking about what she intended to do with the property, using part for event rentals, another for cultivation. She even mentioned renovating the main house, and all with an absurd naturalness, as if it already belonged to her. The notary didn't say much, just waited, and I just wanted to understand. Did Julian mess with my papers? Did he violate my trust? Rummage through my closets? Open documents I keep locked away since Armando left? At that moment, something inside me cracked, a part that had always blindly trusted my son. I raised him with so much care, so much dedication. He never lacked anything. Even after his father's death, I managed as best I could to guarantee schooling, clean clothes, a safe home. And now, out of nowhere, he sends his wife to matter that shouldn't even exist? The cruelest thing is that he didn't even have the courage to come personally. He sent her, and with a notary. That's when I understood it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a planned action. Cold, calculated, because nobody shows up with a notary by chance. I pretended I didn't understand, asked them to leave, claiming I needed to look for the documents. I said that, if that was true, I had to review the papers calmly. Camilla insisted a little, said that Julian was waiting for news still that day. That hurt me more than I can explain. The fact that he wasn't there, the fact that he was pressuring me through her. But I stayed firm, although inside I was falling apart. They left. Camilla gave me a fake smile before leaving. One of those you feel on your skin, you know? A smile that says, I won. As soon as I closed the door, I collapsed. I didn't cry out loud. I didn't even have the strength for that. I sat on the kitchen floor, hugged my knees, and stayed there, staring at nothing. I remembered once, when Julian was little and fell off his bike. I dropped everything to run to him, cleaned his scraped knees with saline solution, and even sang a song he liked to distract him from the pain. And now I was there, trying to clean a wound that didn't bleed on the outside but ripped inside. I tried to find an explanation, a chance to still believe he knew nothing, that Camilla discovered everything alone. But it was difficult, because deep down, something told me he did know, and chose her side. After they left, the house had a strange silence. It wasn't a silence of tranquility. It was a void that hurts. I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer where I kept the keys to the iron wardrobe that has been locked since the day Armando died. Inside, I have the farm documents, the will, the deed, maps, even letters from him. No one was supposed to touch that. I myself only look when I need to check something about the operation with the farm manager, Mr. Baltazar, who takes care of everything for me. And even so, I do it carefully, respectfully, as if opening that wardrobe were like opening a tomb. I stood there, staring at the key in my hand. I didn't want to open it, because opening meant accepting that someone messed where they shouldn't, that maybe my son had violated the only thing my husband asked me to protect. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and tried to remember any occasion when Julian could have had access. There was a time he slept here, shortly before the engagement. He asked for an extra blanket, and the iron wardrobe is in the corridor. Could it have been then? Did he search, rummage, find something and say nothing? Or did Camilla rummage through things herself while I was cooking, or while she pretended to help me organize old documents? I no longer knew what to think, and the worst thing was that everything inside me screamed not to believe what was happening. But the facts were there. A woman showed up with a notary, mentioning a farm that nobody should know existed. You don't pull that out of thin air. And the way she spoke, with that air of someone who already had everything arranged, left no doubt that she felt confident. Camilla didn't seem nervous, didn't seem uncomfortable being there. Quite the opposite. She seemed at ease, as if she were just executing a plan already approved. By whom? Julian. I picked up the phone. I thought of calling him. But what would I say? Why did you tell your wife about the farm your father asked to keep secret? Or worse, did you plan this while I'm still alive? I didn't know what to type. I opened the conversation with him and saw his last message. N, I love you, Mom. Sent 2 days before the wedding. That tore me apart. Because at that moment, I no longer knew if he loved me, or if all that was just a construction to keep me calm, submissive, out of the way. My son, the same one I held in my arms, saw his first steps, hugged so many times when he was afraid of the dark. Late that afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Baltazar. He rarely calls without texting first, so I answered with my heart in my mouth. He asked, in a respectful but direct tone, if I had authorized anyone in the family to contact him about the farm. He said that morning, a woman named Camila had approached him saying that soon everything would be in her name, and that he should report to her starting next month. I felt my legs weaken. I took a deep breath and asked him to ignore any contact from her or anyone who wasn't me. He respected it, as always. But before hanging up, he said something that cut me inside. You always taught me to trust the right word, Mrs. Magdalena. I just asked to make sure the word is still yours. I kept walking around the house like a cornered animal. Everywhere I looked, it seemed I saw a part of my life being dismantled. Camilla had gone too far. And the most serious thing, Julian didn't call me, didn't show up, didn't text me, nothing. I was being sidelined as if I were an obstacle, and that hurt more than anything else. Because if it had been a blow from outside, from a stranger, maybe I would handle it better. But seeing my own son silent, while his wife tried to take something that was sacred to me, that messed with everything I believed. At night, I sat down to dine alone, but I couldn't eat. I looked at the plate made with the same hands that fed my son for so many years, and asked myself how one gets to this point. What did I do wrong? Was I too protective? Did I hide the truth so much that now it turned into a weapon in the wrong hands? It's hard to explain, but I always thought that keeping the existence of the farm was a way of protecting. It was never about money. It was about responsibility, about respect for the memory of a man who worked his whole life on that land. I just wanted to be sure that, when I passed it on, it would be to someone who knew how to honor all that. And at that moment, I was no longer sure of anything. I decided not to sleep. I stayed sitting in the living room, with the light low, holding the deed to the farm in my hands. I thought about everything I could do: change the management, sell, donate, hide it for good. But the hardest thing was thinking that maybe I would have to choose between what is right and what is just. Because as much as Julian was my son, what they were doing was not right. And if I let it go, I would be dishonoring Armando's request. And worse, I would dishonor myself too. It was at that moment that I realized the silence I kept for so many years, the same one that protected me, was now the only weapon I had. The next morning, I made strong coffee and drank it like someone preparing for war. I knew I needed to act before they came back. I returned to the wardrobe, organized all the farm documents in a different, very discreet folder, and hid it inside a box of old Spanish literature, books. No one would ever think to look there, not even someone curious or officious. The wardrobe key, which always stayed in a little box on the dresser, now ended up inside a pot with soil in the backyard. It may seem exaggerated, but when you feel attacked inside your own house, everything becomes a trench. After that, I took a deep breath and sent a message to Julian. Short. I just wrote, "I need to talk to you today. Alone." It took almost an hour for him to reply. He said only, "Sure, Mom. Can it be late afternoon?" I answered yes, but inside I already knew he would come with some rehearsed excuse. I spent the day restless. Every time I heard a noise at the gate, my whole body went on alert. I went to the window several times, just to check if it was him arriving, or if it was just my mind playing tricks. He arrived at the end of the day, as promised. Alone. Camilla didn't come, which already relieved me a bit. I opened the door, and he kissed me on the cheek, as he always did. But it wasn't like always. It was cold, robotic, like someone fulfilling an automatic gesture. We sat in the living room, and I didn't stall. I asked straight, "Did you tell Camilla about the farm?" He fell silent. A few seconds that seemed hours. Then he let out, "Mom, I thought you were waiting for the right time to talk about it. I thought I could speed things up. I thought I was doing the right thing." At that moment, I was sure. He knew. He knew about the farm's existence. He knew about his father's request. He knew everything. But even so, he chose to tell her. And more, he chose to give her power. And the worst was that he still tried to justify it by saying he wanted to spare me the stress, that he only wanted to help me organize everything. That's where I understood that, to him, I was just a piece of the equation, a name on the paper that still needed to sign. And that chilled me, because when a son starts to see his mother as an obstacle, it's because he stopped seeing love a long time ago. I listened to everything without interrupting. I let him talk, try to explain himself, get tangled in his own words. Deep down, I think he expected me to understand, that I would say something like, "All right, my son, it's in your hands now." But I didn't. I just looked into his eyes and asked, "And at what point did you think of asking me if I wanted this?" He fell silent again, a heavy silence. He had no answer, because he didn't think. He just decided that I didn't need to decide anymore. And that, coming from my own son, was like a slap in the face. The worst part was when he mentioned that Camilla had great ideas to modernize the farm, that she was organized, and could help make it yield more. I held back from screaming, because it wasn't about yield. It never was. That wasn't a company. It was history. It was a promise. It was the last living piece of Armando. And hearing my son treated as if it were just land with financial potential made me feel as if he had spat on his own father's grave. Right there, I realized, he understood nothing of what I taught, not about values, nor about respect. I told him that wasn't going to happen, that the farm would remain as it was, under Mr. Baltazar's responsibility, and that neither he nor Camilla had any authority over it. He turned red. I don't know if from anger, shame, or both. He tried to argue, said it was absurd I hid this from him, that I was being selfish. Selfish. That hurt. I, who gave up so much for him, who lived with little so he could have much. Me, selfish? I had to take a deep breath not to get up and send him away right then. But I held on, because I needed to finish that clearly. I looked at him and said, "You are not ready for that responsibility, and the way you acted only confirms that. The farm will stay exactly where it is, with who has always taken care of it right. And, if one day I change my mind, it won't be due to pressure or emotional blackmail. It'll be because someone showed they deserved it." He didn't answer. He lowered his head, fiddled with his phone, as if he wanted to escape as fast as possible. And that's what he did. He left without looking back. And I was there, alone once again, feeling that something inside me had been ripped out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing in bed, reliving every word, every expression on his face, the look of someone who felt thwarted, but not remorseful. Julian seemed annoyed at not getting what he wanted, than at having hurt me, and that devastated me. Because what we fear most as mothers isn't being deceived. It's realizing that maybe the person we raised with so much love got lost. I don't know if it was her influence, ambition, or if he always had that hidden. But I knew that now. I could no longer close my eyes. The next day, I got a message from Camilla. Short, cold. "I'm sorry if there was any misunderstanding. It wasn't my intention to cause discomfort." I stared at those words like someone facing poison disguised as tea. She knew what she was doing, and it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Discomfort only appeared because I wasn't the foolish old woman she thought she would find. I deleted the message without replying. I knew that from then on, any word out of my mouth would have to be carefully measured. I couldn't treat this situation with naivety anymore. That same week, I called my lawyer, a calm gentleman who handled Armando's will paperwork back then. I asked him to update all records and ensure the farm had clear ownership clauses, preventing any transfer attempts without my direct and in-person authorization. He understood right away, didn't ask anything, just said, "I'll take care of it as if it were my mother's." And there, I felt a small but real relief, as if I were finally taking back the control of something they tried to rip away by force. After that, I did something I never imagined doing. I wrote a letter to Armando. I know it sounds crazy, but I needed to tell him I was protecting what was his, that the secret was kept, that even in pain, I stayed firm. I wrote with trembling hands, crying in silence, sitting on the veranda with the smell of the plants around me. When I finished, I folded the paper and put it inside one of his old books, the one with the dedication he gave me when we married. I don't know if anyone will ever read it, but I needed to hear myself saying I didn't fail. In the following days, Julian didn't show up. No messages, no calls. His silence screamed louder than any argument, and as much as it hurt, I started to accept that maybe the bond between us had changed irreversibly. I went to the market, tended the garden, did my things trying to keep my mind busy, but it was impossible not to notice the emptiness. Every time the phone rang, my heart raced. It was a foolish hope, the kind we have even when we already know the answer. But it wasn't him. It was never him. The neighbors started asking about the wedding, how Julian's newlywed life was. I smiled, answered with ready phrases, and changed the subject. No one needed to know what was happening. Not everyone deserves to know our pain. Sometimes hiding is protection, not cowardice. I began to realize that there was more strength in my silence than I imagined, because telling everything, screaming, accusing, sometimes only fuels the other's game, but keeping quiet and acting within was what kept me standing. One late afternoon, while I was watering the plants, I saw Camilla driving slowly down the street. She didn't stop, didn't wave, just passed. But her eyes searched for me, like someone measuring the battlefield. That chilled me inside. It was a silent warning. It's not over yet. But there, with the hose in hand, the smell of wet earth and the flowers around me, I felt a strange peace, a new strength, because I was no longer the same woman from a week ago. Something in me had awakened, and I would not retreat anymore. I decided to do something symbolic. I took one of the old photos of Armando on the farm, in black and white, and placed it on the living room shelf, very visible. It was like a reminder to myself, and to anyone entering that house, of where everything began, and who had built that with sweat and dignity. That house might look simple, but it held history, and as long as I was alive, no one would erase it. The farm was more than land. It was memory. It was value. And I finally understood that protecting it was also protecting myself. About 3 days later, Julian showed up again, this time unannounced. He knocked on the door in the middle of the afternoon, with a haggard face. I opened, but didn't invite him in right away. I stood there, at the door, waiting for him to say his purpose. He apologized, said he had been pressured by Camilla, that he didn't want to hurt me, that he was confused. Confused. The word made me nauseous, because confusion is what we feel before making wrong decisions. After acting, the name of that is choice, and he chose. Only now, faced with my firmness, he might be trying to go back. I ended up letting him in, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to look into his eyes once more. We sat at the table. He said he didn't know Camilla would go so far, that she got carried away, that she was very fast, that she only wanted to help. I kept listening, but this time, without reacting. Room for emotional manipulation. He tried to hug me. I couldn't. My body froze. It was as if a part of me no longer recognized that hug, as if it were from another time, from another version of him that no longer existed. I asked what he wanted now, and he said he wanted to fix things, that we could calmly talk about the farm's future. I almost laughed. I spoke firmly. The farm's future is not up for discussion. It is not for sale. It is not available. And it is not a topic for anyone outside. Here, he tried to interrupt, but I continued. If you want to be my son, you will have to understand that not everything is won with cleverness. Some things are only received with respect. He kept quiet. For the first time, he seemed to really listen. Before leaving, he said he needed to think, that he was going to talk to Camilla. I only said, do that, and opened the door for him to leave. No hug, no kiss, just a long look that carried everything I didn't say in words. When the door closed, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, not because the problem was solved, but because, finally, I was putting myself first. For the first time in a long time, I didn't let motherly love stop me from protecting myself, and that, for me, was already a victory. After that day, the silence reigned between us again, but this time I didn't suffer so much for it. I started to see this silence as a space for healing, not for him, for me. For the first time, I realized I no longer needed to try so hard to maintain relationships that only drained me. I had always been the mother who called, who texted, who remembered dates, who prepared his favorite dish when he came. But now I saw myself as someone who also deserved consideration, who also needed to be cared for, even if only by myself. I began to take even more care of the garden, the house interior, my readings. I revisited passages from books I used to teach my students, mainly those that talked about honor, about moral, inheritance. Dignity isn't inherited, it's built. That echoed in my head as a reminder that everything that was happening was part of a cycle, and that I could still choose the end of this story. Camilla and Julian could have their plans, but I had my conscience, my story, and my firmness, things that can't be bought or taken by force. I started to review all the farm folders with Mr. Baltazar. We exchanged ideas on how to better protect what was built there. We updated contracts, reinforced legal protections, adjusted weak points. He looked at me with a respect that hurt and healed at the same time. "You're stronger, Mrs. Magdalena," he said one afternoon. I smiled without vanity. I knew how much I had bled inside to reach that strength. It wasn't conquest. It was necessity. It was survival. The following week, Camilla called me. First time since that day she came with the notary. I answered. She said she regretted everything and that things got out of control. She used that sweet, fake tone, like someone trying to put out a fire with perfume. She said the marriage was in crisis, that Julian was distant. I listened, just listened. In the end, she asked if she could come here to talk personally. I replied calmly, I don't think it's necessary, Camilla. I wish you peace. But here, there's no more room for conversation. And I hung up, without remorse, without trembling. That's when I realized that, finally, I was free. After that call, I never heard her voice again, nor did I try to find out if they were still together, if they separated, if she brought up the farm again. I felt that cycle had closed, at least for me. Julian, on the other hand, still sent me short messages from time to time. Hi, Mom. All good? Need anything? They were polite but cold, and I replied the same way. Not out of revenge, but because one learns that some bridges, when they crack, won't hold the same weight again. And I didn't want to force what wasn't whole anymore. One morning, I sat on the veranda and watched the birds in the yard. They always came early, as if they knew they would find peace here. And it was at that simple, silent moment that I realized how valuable peace is. For a long time, I thought protecting the farm was protecting a material asset. But now, with everything that happened, I understood that what I was really protecting was my autonomy. My right to decide, to trust, to step back when something smelled wrong. And above all, my right to be respected. I never imagined that at 64 I would need to reaffirm such basic limits with my own son. But life is like that. Sometimes we teach and believe we planted everything right, and we'll only discover at harvest if it was seed or illusion. That hurts, but it also frees. Because it is in this confrontation with the truth that we begin to see ourselves as individuals, not just as mother, widow, or retired lady, but as a woman who can still say no without feeling guilty, who can protect what is hers without apologizing for it. Sometime later, I found an old note from Armando inside one of the books on the shelf. I didn't even remember it existed. It was small, with his handwriting a bit shaky, as it was in his last years. It said, "If one day you have to choose between pleasing and protecting, choose protecting, because those who truly love you will understand." I cried, not out of sadness, but of recognition. It was as if he had foreseen this might happen, as if, even absent, he was there, giving me the last confirmation I needed. I did right. With time, I started talking more with Mr. Baltazar about the farm's past. We recalled stories of Armando, the first years of production, the parties that happened there during harvests. It was therapeutic, because there, in that piece of land that seemed forgotten by everyone, lived my story. And rescuing that helped me remember that I wasn't just a victim of what happened. I was the guardian of something that lasted generations. I even started thinking about restoring some parts of the old main house, not to show off, but to preserve, as a way of saying, this is still alive. One of the things that struck me most in this process was realizing how people confuse silence with weakness. For years, I was seen as the discreet widow, the calm mother, the lady who didn't get into anyone's life. But silence is also choice. It is shield. And now I knew how to use it wisely. It was no longer about hiding. It was about preserving what matters. Julian, Camilla, the notary, they all thought my quiet way was a gap, but they forgot that the one who keeps quiet out of wisdom also knows how to speak firmly when needed. One day, while going through old papers, I found a copy of Armando's will. In it, he reinforced something I never forgot. I leave Magdalena not only as the owner of the farm, but as its guardian. I trust her more than any other human being in this life. I read that aloud, cried again. It was like a seal of everything I had been feeling. I didn't need anyone's approval. That land was my responsibility, and I wasn't going to hand it to the wrong hands for convenience or fear of seeming tough. After that reading, I did something symbolic. I went to the hacienda, something I hadn't done in months. I walked through the field, entered the old house, touched the walls, the windows, the furniture that still held the smell of time. I took a deep breath and felt at home again. I said aloud, just to myself, This will continue the right way. It was like a pact, not with the past, but with the future. A silent but firm commitment to honor everything built there, and not allow any interest, no matter how disguised, to take the place of what is true. After that visit to the farm, I felt something inside me had reorganized, as if a piece had been out of place for a long time and, finally, had fit. I started sleeping better. The back pains decreased. Even the food seemed tastier. It may seem exaggerated, but when we remove from the soul a weight we carried in silence, even the body thanks us. I no longer thought about Julian all the time, nor about Camilla. I thought about myself, about what I still wanted to live, what I could still build, even after 60. Then I decided to write a diary. Simple thing, just for me. I began to note the days, the feelings, the good memories, and even the disappointments. Sometimes I wrote letters I would never send. Other times, I just listed what I needed to remember. Don't leave the key in the usual place. Tell Baltazar about the new clause. That became my space for self-reunion. It was as if, by writing, I was recovering the parts that got scattered after everything that happened. Not to forget, but to organize. One of those days, while writing, I thought about Julian's mother, the biological one, who left so early. I wondered if she also had doubts like mine, if she would have made the same choices. I realized that maybe there isn't a mother who doesn't question herself, who doesn't suffer in silence, who isn't afraid of making mistakes even when getting it right. And this reflection made me feel less alone, less guilty too, because in the end, we do what we can with what we have. And what I had was love, care, and a memory that needed to be honored. That was enough. That same night, I dreamed of Armando for the first time in a long time. He was sitting on the farm veranda, reading the newspaper, as he did every Sunday. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "You held on tight, as always." I woke up crying, but it wasn't sadness. It was a calm longing, one that embraces instead of hurting. And I understood that even with everything, I managed to do what he expected of me, not out of obligation, but because it was right, because we only find peace when we look back and know that, even in pain, we were faithful to who we are. Months passed. Life returned to a calmer rhythm, like before, but not the same. I was different. My eyes were more alert, my voice firmer, and most importantly, my conscience was light. One day, Julian came again, this time alone, without warning, no rehearsed expression. He sat with me on the veranda, in silence, and stayed there for a while, just looking at the yard. After a few minutes, he said, "You did right, Mom." I didn't respond immediately. I just nodded, and that was the closest thing to an apology that I felt coming from him. He started talking more openly, said things with Camilla were not well, that a lot had surfaced, and that he was now reviewing decisions, including those he made with me. I listened, without judgment, but without the vulnerability of before. I was no longer the mother who would do anything to keep the relationship intact. I was the woman who survived a betrayal attempt disguised as affection, and in that position, I could listen without losing myself. I told him that love is not submission, that broken trust takes time, and sometimes it doesn't return, and that even forgiveness when it comes doesn't erase what was done. Julian cried. For the first time in a long time, I saw in him the boy who fell from his bike and came running to my lap. But now I couldn't just welcome him without remembering the falls he caused himself. I told him I didn't hold hatred, but that the path to a true reunion was his, not mine. I had done mine. I had said no when it hurt the most, and as painful as it still was, I knew I needed to keep the line, for the farm, for Armando's memory, and mainly for me. Before he left, he hugged me. A different hug, not of possession, not of guilt. It was just a silent hug, like someone recognizing the pain he caused and knowing he might not be able to undo it. I hugged back, because despite everything, he was still my son, but not the one I would let lead my story. Closing the gate, I felt I had closed a cycle, not with resentment, but with maturity. Sometimes being a mother is that. It's not about always welcoming, but about teaching until the end, even when teaching means saying no firmly and staying standing. After that day, Julian's visits became more spaced, but more sincere. He came without pretense, sometimes just to have coffee and talk about simple things. He never again touched on the farm subject, and neither did I. It was as if that topic had been buried, but not under the rug, instead in a place where we no longer needed to dig. The conversations now came, with real pauses, with silences that didn't bother, as if we were relearning to exist in each other's presence, without charge, without idealizations. I began to realize little by little that the mother and son relationship can also go through mourning. We grieve for the image we created, for the expectation, for the projection, and when that image collapses, it seems that we lose the person. But over time, if there is truth, it can be rebuilt, not as it was, but as it can be. And that's what I decided to try with Julianne, not as the mother who would do everything, but as the woman who learned that loving is also preserving oneself, also placing limits, and that, sometimes, the most loving thing is not to allow. One afternoon, I received a call from Mr. Baltazar informing me that a foreign group had made a millionaire offer for the farm. He said they thought I was too old to take care of it alone. I laughed and replied that their problem was thinking age limits wisdom. I thanked him for the information and asked him to formally refuse. I didn't even hesitate, because now, more than ever, I knew it wasn't about money. It was about identity, about keeping alive a story that couldn't be sold as if it were just land. I stopped for a few minutes after the call. I looked at the view from the kitchen window, with the sunlight gently touching the old furniture. I thought about everything I lived that year, and I felt a sense of pride, not for winning a battle, but for not having betrayed myself in the process, for not letting fear, loneliness, or neediness make decisions for me. If I had given in, today I might not have the farm, nor my peace. But because I held firm, I gained something that is worth even more, the certainty that no one took me away from myself. After that refusal, some saw me as stubborn. I overheard a neighbor saying I should take the opportunity before it's too late. But what these people don't understand is that not every opportunity comes to add. Some come to test us, and I had already undergone enough tests. The farm wasn't a chance for profit, it was a mission, and if I sold it out of fear or convenience, everything I defended until now would lose meaning. One doesn't sell roots to someone who only wants to reap fruit. On one of my trips to the hacienda, I sat on the old veranda with Mr. Baltazar. It was calmer that day, the sky clear, a gentle wind running through the trees. He told me that since the incident, the workers there had commented on how the lady has returned to walk firmly. That took me by surprise. I had never thought my posture affected so many people. But that's it. When we take a stand, we're not just protecting what is ours. We're setting an example. We're telling the world, and those around us, that our story deserves respect. I went back home thinking about that. I spent the night thinking about how, sometimes, the silence I kept so much wasn't just defense, but also teaching. Armando taught me that without many words, with his quiet and observant way. And today, I realized I was repeating that same legacy. Julianne is also child of that. Maybe it will take years to understand. Maybe he'll never understand. But I did my part. And now, living at peace with that was enough. I no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. One weekend, I organized a small meal here at home. I invited only the closest neighbors and Mr. Baltazar. I prepared everything with care, my way. Simple food, flowers from the garden, soft music playing on the old radio. When everyone arrived, I smiled like I hadn't smiled in a long time. Because there, surrounded by people who respect my story, I felt safe. I felt I had rebuilt my world without fuss. And that, even after so much, it was possible, yes, to be happy. Not as before, but as now. During that lunch, one neighbor commented how she admired my calmness, how I always seemed to know what to do. I smiled kindly, but inside I thought of everything I had to swallow in silence, of how many nights I cried in the dark living room, of how many times I was my only company and comfort. The calm they saw was the result of much confrontation. The serenity that seemed natural was built in the crossfire, and if today I was there, whole, it's because I learned to rebuild myself inside before expecting any repair from outside. After everyone left, I washed the dishes slowly, unhurried. Each clean plate seemed like a finished stage. The house returned to silence, but it was a good silence, of a home at peace. I went to the shelf, took the diary, and wrote. Today I celebrated, not for having won over anyone, but for staying true to myself. That is worth more than any inheritance. I closed the notebook and felt like I had ended an important chapter, not of my life, but of my soul. And the feeling was of lightness, not the lightness of someone who forgot, but of someone who survived. Opened the window, I went to the bedroom and let the wind in. I looked at the darkening sky and thanked, in silence, for not giving up on myself. It had been a hard year, painful, but it was also the year I reconnected with the woman I was before being only mother, only wife, only guardian. I discovered there was still time to restart, not life, but the way of living. And that gave me new strength, a type of self-love that doesn't shout, but sustains, that requires nothing from anyone, only presence from oneself. That night, I went to bed early. For the first time in months, I slept deeply, without waking up in the middle of the night with a tight chest. I dreamed of the farm, but this time there was no fear, nor threats, only me walking among the trees, hearing the sounds of the land, smelling the damp earth, and Armando's laughter in the background. When I woke up, I understood. That was my heart saying it was at peace, that the battle had passed, and that I had done what needed to be done. In the following days, I began visiting the farm more often, not to solve urgent things, but just to be there. I took my books, sat under the trees, listened to the sounds of the countryside that always made part of my story. I began writing again, not in the diary, but on loose sheets. My stories, memories of Julian's childhood, recollections of the time Armando still surprised me with flowers discreetly left on the veranda. Writing became a bridge between past and present, and it was there, on that dirt floor, that I realized there was still new life to be born from all that. One afternoon, I met a group of children playing near the farm fence. We talked. I gave them fruit, told stories. One of them, the most curious, asked me if that place was mine. I answered yes. "But do you live here?" she insisted. I said no, that I lived elsewhere, but that this place was mine like our heart is. You can't see it on the outside, but it's where you return when you need to remember who you are. She smiled and told me, "So you're like the owner of memories." And I swear, nobody has ever defined me so well. After that, I returned home and decided to do something I had been postponing. Write a final letter to Julian, not to accuse, nor to reopen wounds, but to register everything that got stuck. I wrote calmly, truthfully. I said that despite the pain, there was still love, but that now this love was different. It was a love that knew how far it could go, that understood its own limits, and that as much as the bond between us still existed, I needed him to understand. Trust is not demanded, it's earned, and that, if he wanted to rebuild, time would have to prove more than words. I kept the letter, without haste to deliver it. Maybe one day I will, maybe not. Because what mattered was having said it, was having taken it out from inside. And it was at that moment I realized, our life isn't made only of the things we manage to keep, but also of what we decide to let go. And I was letting go of guilt, charge, the fear of seeming tough. Because now I knew, being firm didn't make me less mother, nor less woman. It made me whole. On a sunny Saturday, I went to Armando's grave. I brought fresh flowers, cleaned the headstone, sat on the bench beside, and stayed there for a long time, in silence. After everything I had lived, it was as if I needed to give an account. Not out of obligation, but out of honor. I spoke softly, like someone talking to someone who still listens the right way. I told him what happened with Julian, the attempts of invasion, the firmness I had to find in myself. I said I protected what was ours, that, even alone, I didn't let anything be lost. Leaving the cemetery, I took a deep breath. It was strange, but I felt as if Armando had given me one last sign of approval. I can't explain. It was more a feeling than anything else. And maybe, in the end, that's what we need to move on in peace, to feel we didn't betray what really matters. I went, back home with a light head and a stronger heart. The pain was still there, but it no longer commanded my steps. It was part of the baggage, not the destination. A week later, I received a simple letter in the mail. It was from Julian, a short note saying he was reflecting on everything, that he understood my stance, and that if one day I wanted, he would like to restart, without pressure, in the right time. I read, took a deep breath, and kept it in the drawer. I didn't cry, but I also didn't harden. I kept it not for hope, but for respect for what could, maybe, be rebuilt with honesty. Now, everything involving this bond for me would have to be born from zero, without bargains, without shortcuts. Days returned to run at a peaceful rhythm. I watered the plants, read my books, cared for the house, and, when needed, I went to the farm, sometimes just to smell the earth, sometimes just to sit on the veranda and let time pass. That, for me, was already more than a place. It was my way of existing. And realizing that made me understand that there are assets that aren't measured by deeds, but by meaning, and that was the greatest of them. I began to see my story with different eyes, not as a sequence of losses, but as a crossing. What was left along the way taught me. What I tried to protect strengthened me, and what I managed to keep alive saved me. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance Armando left me wasn't the land. It was the conviction that we need to be firm with those who try to bend us, even if that someone is part of our own family. Today, when I look back, I feel no regret. I feel pride, because I went to the end with my principles, because I faced loneliness, doubt, pain, and still didn't give up on myself. That, for me, is worth more than any outside acceptance, because living in peace with one's own conscience is a kind of wealth nobody can steal. Perhaps not everyone understands the choices I made. Maybe they say I overreacted, that I was radical. But those who have had their trust broken by someone they love know the weight of that, and also know how rare it is to manage to get up, not just on your feet, but whole. And that's what I did. I got up. And if today I tell this story, it's not to seek pity nor applause. It's to leave recorded, for anyone who someday goes through something similar, that you can say no, you can protect yourself, and still keep loving. But loving the right way, the way that starts with yourself. Sometimes, we spend a lifetime to understand that love and limits can, and must, walk together, and that protecting what is ours is not a sign of selfishness. It's a sign of respect. If you got this far, maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe you have already had to swallow pain in silence, just to keep your peace standing. Tell me in the comments if this story touched you in any way. Sometimes, sharing a piece of our experience helps other people feel less alone. And if you know someone going through a moment of doubt, rupture, or difficult choice, share this video. It might reach them at the right time. Life is made of those silences that speak, of those choices no one sees, but that change everything inside. If you want to follow more real stories that stir what we truly feel, stay here with us. There's still a lot to tell. Thank you for staying until the end. May you also have the courage to listen to yourself, even when the whole world expects you to be silent.